Can you guys introduce Mommy?
Spill the beans with Dr. Jill.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with Spill the Beans with Dr. Jill. I have an exciting guest today who, in a moment, I'm going to allow to introduce himself, but I will share with you some fun facts. I met this individual when I was working at Franklin Pierce University in New Hampshire. We didn't get to work together very long, but boy, was the impact forever a life. And so I would love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself today.
Hi, my name's Bill Beardslee. I am a United Church of Christ pastor and a pastoral psychotherapist. Um, it did 12 years actually at Franklin Pierce, at which time Jill and I met, and just worked peripherally within the church and had my private practice. Well, yeah, and I was with a group for a while too. I'm a dad. I have 3 kids and a voluminous amount of grandchildren, which I love. Live in Warner, New Hampshire now, and am enjoying semi-retirement from the church. I continue my counseling practice.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your background, Bill. So my first question for you is, before my research, had you any knowledge or expertise in understanding vicarious trauma?
Yes,
Can you talk a little bit about what you were taught?
sure. I was deeply in my both in my training and my personal reading was deeply influenced by the work of Carl Jung. And Jung, talked about the collective unconscious and talked about trauma in terms of what he called complexes, which are parts of us that, if we're unconscious, uh, can uh, can lead us into all sorts of trouble. Um, and and he had a concept of a collective unconscious also, through which comes um, sort of a legacy or historical experiences. And I was later introduced to IFS and actually have done the training, the level 1 training, and they call the vicarious trauma, the way I understand it, they talk about legacy burdens.
Mm-hmm.
And these are burdens that come to us that really don't belong to us,
Yes.
and are trauma producing if we're unconscious of them. And then there's the whole realm, I was taught early on about a transference, countertransference, and taking on the suffering of other people without having structures in place to have appropriate boundaries or protections to keep us from being harmed by that vicarious uh, amount of energy that's not ours.
It's a great way to describe it. One of the things I talk about in my workshops is the helping professions that have been researched for the vicarious trauma, and the medical profession, the law profession, emergency disaster reliefs, and social services are one of the highest sectors that are individually researched. But clergy, and why I thought of you, you're like the perfect merge of clergy and educators, right? And so there's been lots of research on clergy and their levels of vicarious trauma, but educators, that's like the new up and coming. And so I published in 2019, and I didn't have a lot in my lit review because it hadn't been established yet that educators
Mm.
receive vicarious trauma. So I'm curious because, in your expertise, you're working with individuals that, I should say, you've done lots of blessings. You've done marriages, and you're there for some happy moments. But I also have to assume that you're there through a lot of the trauma, right? Like the divorces or other life events. What have you learned on how to manage your vicarious trauma?
Um, well, I early on had the benefit of some great mentors
Mm,
um, who guided me in understanding well, let's just use that phrase that's so central to what we're doing here and what you're doing, vicarious trauma. And the necessity of understanding the dynamics of the unconscious and the sponge-like substance of psyche
yeah,
that just takes this stuff in. So when you're drawn to teaching or ministry or any helping profession, there's it's usually a person that has a great amount of empathy,
sure.
a great amount of compassion. And if they don't understand these dynamics, they absorb it and they over identify with the client or the student or the parishioner or whatever. And that leads to all kinds of complications. So early on, I had a meditation practice, which I still have on and off. I'm not as consistent as I would like to be, but uh, I used to do on a this 8 day silent retreats. I've had a spiritual director. I've had therapists along the way. And a tendency to be aware of those dynamics. And in my denomination, we're required to take what's called boundary training. And over the years, have participated in various workshops that have emphasized the necessity of self-care and being aware of these dynamics. And you're right, you know, it's informed me to such an extent that I've always worked with people on family systems and trying to understand the generational impact of trauma on them. Just by looking at a genogram,
Right.
you can see this, and so it's been very helpful. Both, I remember the first genogram I did and then had a powerful experience in some training that I was doing where I realized some of the vicarious trauma I was carrying from my family of origin. So that was very helpful to see that and not just see it, but realize I had to do something about it to understand its continuing impact on me.
One of the things I've learned by doing my workshops is how many are in the education sector that not only have not understood or been introduced to vicarious trauma, but some of them really downplay and say that this is a, byproduct of the job and just push, push, push. And so I have to kind of peel back that onion a lot with practitioners about why it's so important to rejuvenate before taking on the next student or the next client or whatever it is. And you're speaking a lot of what you've developed is called protective factors. And we talk a lot about mentorship and menteeship as a protective factor because if you obtain a mentee, you're typically talking about why you fell in love with the job. And then the mentor is that protective, I can just share anything with you and be vulnerable because you've been there, you've done that, and you're invested in me. So
Mm.
I love that you're connecting the two. I'm curious to know with the project that you're working on and where you're at in your life, is there any intersection of what you're doing the latest and greatest and the work that I'm doing with vicarious trauma? Is there anything that's kind of the intersectionality of it right now?
Um, the intersectionality of what I'm doing and the work that you're doing. There's a tremendous amount,
I
I
was gonna
think.
say, because I have like a list. I didn't know if one was popping out for you. I will share that you are very active on your social media platforms. You're very informational and really being able to give individuals a lot of facts of everything from the national landscape to best practices. And I'm constantly like, I hope Bill is taking care of himself as well, because you really have such a wide net of who you're supporting. But I didn't know if anything, when I asked you to be on this, if there was anything aha that came to mind of like, that's so interesting that Jill wants me to speak because this is what's going on with me.
Well, yeah, I was very excited to get your letter because this has been such an integral part of my professional and personal life. And number one, I want to be supportive of the work that you're doing, and just wanted to, see where this would go in terms of what are the intersections and the parallels and all of that. And I think that they're pretty clear. I mean, you use a different language, and I read up a little bit on, on that, on the whole field and the way that that's developed, separate from the things that I've been involved in. But the parallels are stunning, and I think there's different language and maybe different understanding of some of the dynamics, but it all leads to the same place about how vicariously we can be affected
Mm-hmm.
through our personal biographies as well as our professional journeys in these different areas, and anything that can support this work, um, I think is really important. Another person that has been very influential is Gabor Mate, a doctor who has, he did a I think it was like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hour video on trauma
Mm-hmm.
that well, I watched. His first showing, there were couple thousand people, which is not unusual for these kinds of things. But it went up into the 50,000s, into the 100,000s, until it just exploded uh, all over the web, and in people's lives, what he was uncovering. Some hearing these things for the first time, and so I almost did a train with him too, but I had already been really ensconced in IFS, and he and Richard Schwartz, who was the founder of IFS, have done a lot of work together, and I have done a workshop with them teaching together, which was just astounding. Brilliant, brilliant people. Jill Fisher is another one, or maybe Jenna, I don't know, Jill or Jenna Fisher, who's done a lot with this arena. Did I answer your question?
No, yeah, no, I love that you are one of the people that I'm inviting that has a background, has an understanding, and you're really talking about the appreciation. I hope that the viewers and the listeners heard your career and the longevity of your career. I contribute a lot of that to your awareness of your vicarious trauma. And some of the counselors and even clergy that I'm working with as of late are really drained and feeling very burnt out. And when I introduce these ideas and say, didn't your training include some of this? I don't know if it was COVID or what, but everything seemed very accelerated. And they're like, that wasn't part of the curriculum. And so I'm encouraging us to get back to that and putting the practitioner in a human space and saying, it's not about how many people you meet within the day. It's about what you're producing, and that you return to work with the same energy each day, and not that we're taking it from you like a lemon and squeezing the juice. So I think just what you embody is that practice, right? Of putting the practitioner first to be able to help others, you know?
Yeah.
If there was one word or one phrase that you would like the audience to know, to what I call spill the beans, what would it be at this point in time?
Stillness.
Oh, can you say a little more about that?
Sure. Um, I think that being still, slowing down, going inward, being reflective, contemplative, um, is critically important to any of us in the helping professions. Um, because without that stillness, I think we're susceptible to a lot. I love the way you describe my engagement with social media. Um, I've watched myself as, in my opinion and estimation, our collective social life, political life has degenerated, and it's so overwhelming.
Mhm.
Um, and since COVID in particular, and the things that have happened since that time, any person that I've worked with says something about how overwhelming
Mm.
what's going on out there is and how it impacts their lives. And, or they enter, as a clergy person, they enter into relationship and they don't bring that stillness and that reflection.
Mhm.
And it just leads to a conflictual relationship that, as the statistics show, may end up in divorce because there's no stillness. There's no ability to step back to find the space within to be reflective about oneself so that one can be more sensitive to the other.
Mhm.
That so much projection takes place when there's no stillness, finger pointing, blaming, all of that kind of stuff without saying, oh, well, this might have something to do with me. It might have something to do with my vicarious trauma. It might have something to do with my trauma, never
Sure.
mind vicarious.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's my word and a little explanation of it.
Thank you so much. It is much needed. One of the things I've committed with the series is to do it during my lunch break so that I could really be present. And just sitting here, being present with you and being still is really rewarding for me. And I'm hoping that the audience, I'm trying to create a platform for these guests to come in and share these nuances and give others permission, which is really what I'm hearing in my workshop is that individuals are like, not only did you give me the language to identify how I'm feeling, but you're giving me antidotes and permission. And I'm like, yes, let me show you more people that will say some more of the same. So you're echoing it, you're reinforcing it, and you're supporting me. So thank you very much for your time today on Spill the Beans with Dr. Jill. And until next week, I will post another video of another amazing guest. But keep in mind, as what Bill just said, let's try to be still. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jill.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on today's episode. I really wanted to highlight the wisdom that Bill is bringing to the conversation. So I switched up the frame so that you could really focus on when he was talking. But I also wanted to come back to share some more language for you to have. Because so the first thing I want to share with you is just understanding of what vicarious trauma is and isn't. So PTSD is a medical diagnosis, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I want you to think about a car accident for a moment. When a person is in a car accident, they might exhibit PTSD symptoms. They might have headaches. They might have physical ailments. They might need some self-care afterwards with mental health or medications. They might even go on FMLA and, the trauma happened to them. And what I want you to think about with that analogy is what Dr. Skip Lipsky, sorry, said in 2009. So Lipsky had this idea that trauma creates a ripple effect, kind of similar to when you throw a stone into the water and there's that tight ripple. That's going to be the PTSD. It's very close to the stone. What vicarious trauma is that secondary ripple. And so think about the individuals who saw the car accident, or I come to work and I tell you about the car accident that I was in. Because you're emotionally invested in me as my colleague, that's the second ripple, and that's the vicarious trauma. The ripple beyond that is so far away from the initial stone that the impact is so small. So that's going to be who I share my vicarious trauma with. With that being said, there are some protective factors that you can do, some that we have control over and some that we do not, that can protect you in managing your vicarious trauma. Because keep in mind, vicarious trauma is not an illness, right? It's an experience, which means you can't fall ill from vicarious trauma, okay? But the other thing too is that no doctor can deny that you have vicarious trauma, no supervisor can deny it. It's a lived experience. I feel like I have vicarious trauma because of the trauma I just absorbed from other people. Okay. So, support networks. I've mentioned this a couple times. I want to reiterate it. Therapists, mentors, friends, some family members. It's really important that we're sharing our experience with others. Now, you're not going to give them all the details of the trauma, right? But having that emotional connection with another person will be able to help you manage your vicarious trauma better. Participants who are in a coupled relationship, maybe partnered in a marriage, they have organic emotional companion to talk about these cases. And so if they're utilizing them as support, that can definitely help. Some other things that we necessarily can't control is the amount of cases that you have in one day. You might have 10 cases in one day, and so you haven't been able to hit the reset button in a while. In another episode, I'm going to teach you some strategies and hopefully plant some tools that will be helpful for you. So that's all that I have for today in the reflection of Bill's presentation with us today, who is reminding us to be still. And I hope that that information is helpful for you. Be well.